Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Cantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. This week, I'm excited to welcome Abigail Hing Wen. She's a mother, a lawyer, and now a best-selling author. Her fifth book, Loveboat Taipei, has recently been adapted into a film called Love in Taipei, which premieres August 10th on Paramount Plus. She shares with us her persistent and long journey to becoming a full-time storyteller and how she passes on her love of story to her children by first just telling them stories like she did for her younger siblings and then sharing some of her favorite films with them. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Cantor, and I am here today with Abigail Hing Wen. She has worn very many hats in her career, from lawyer to an AI specialist to podcast host to best-selling author, and now an adaptation of her book, Loveboat Taipei, called Love in Taipei, will be premiering August 10th on Paramount Plus. So welcome, Abigail.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So my first question is, what is your first movie memory?
It was actually this film called Benji the Hunted, which was about a dog. And that's all I remember. It was about a dog named Benji and a family. And I do love dogs. When I was growing up, I always wanted a puppy, and I would read every single dog book there was out there. So I think getting to see like wish fulfillment on the screen and see a family have their dog was really special to me. And then I also had a crush on a guy named Benji in first grade. So I think that had something to do with it as well.
I love that. And that was in the theater?
That's my first memory of a film in the theater.
That's wonderful. And what was it like growing up in your household, seeing movies? And you have siblings, I think I read.
I didn't really think much of it. We did have a movie theater down the street when I was in middle school and high school. We watched a lot of Saturday morning cartoons, but I always say I never graduated to sitcoms. And I actually didn't know why. I thought maybe I was just immature, that I only liked cartoons and I lived on cartoons even well into my older years. But I realized later on it was actually because I didn't recognize anything in sitcoms. Like nothing for me was relatable. I didn't see myself in them. I didn't see my family in them. And so I think that's probably why I just never got absorbed into them. But movies, I think, have always been a different thing. I would watch certain ones over and over, like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Titanic, Back to the Future was a big one. And sometimes we just do family movie night where we'd put on a tape or a DVD in the family room, just watch it together.
Were you the oldest or the youngest of the siblings?
I was the oldest of three.
The oldest of three. Okay. The last few conversations I was with the youngest with big age difference, and they were talking a lot about seeing wildly inappropriate films for their age because they were brought along on the ride. And I'm curious if you feel, did you have any kind of responsibility in what your younger siblings saw and what you chose to see?
Well, I grew up in Ohio in a pretty small town, so I think there was a lot of just natural community controls in terms of what was shown in the theaters or what was available at the library or the local film store. I don't think I really paid attention to that in particular, but I do remember that whenever we watched soap operas with my parents, every time a kissing scene came on, my dad would change the channel. So I got back at him when I wrote Loveboat Taipei. I gave him a copy to read and I deleted all the kissing scenes. So he got a redacted version.
I love that. That's really funny. Well, speaking of watching movies as a child to having a film based off of your book that you're a producer on, I also hear that you're a director. Are you directing a future film, a future version?
I have a short that I'm working on. It will be my debut.
Amazing. Okay, before we get there, we'll talk about it. What was your journey to discovering you wanted to work in this space in storytelling?
Yeah, it was a very windy journey. I had no idea that I could do this type of work. But when I look back, I can see the footprints. So I think when I look back, I see a little girl who loves stories. I still remember people saying to me like that they didn't love stories the way I did. But I grew up telling stories to my brother and sister. I made up adventures of us and our friends in a world without grown-ups and, making our way in the world. And I journaled a lot. Since fourth grade, I think it was my way of processing my feelings and just my observations of the world around me. And I think growing up Asian American in Ohio, I was really conscious of fitting in and not fitting in. And so stories, I think, were a way for me to understand the world around me. Like I used to think that the way movies were was how people in America lived. Like I remember I'd see some old movies where they had two beds for the married couple. And that was like a thing, I think, in Hollywood at the time where they didn't think it was proper for an unmarried actors to be sharing a bed. So they gave them two beds, which isn't actually how people live. But as a kid, I thought, oh, that's how people in America, they have separate beds, even though they're married. So those are, I think, just for me, a way to learn about people and kind of be a fly on the wall in other people's lives and just experience, what they go through.
Were you ever introduced to Asian cinema as a teenager or adolescent, or even in college? One of the filmmakers that I was introduced to that I fell in love with in college in cinema studies was Wong in The Mood for Love. That was one of the first, subtitle films that I just forgot I was reading. It just really sucked me in.
Yeah, I actually didn't see any growing up. I think there was one called Gung Ho, and there was another. I think we saw Bruce Lee movies with my cousins, but that was it. So I really just saw the stereotypical Asian American portrayals. And I do remember though, whenever every time we saw like an Asian person come on a screen, very rarely even, my parents would be like, oh, there's an Asian person, right? And it would be like a cause for joy. We saw somebody that looks like us. But when I went to college, a bunch of my friends there were watching all the Jet Li movies. I'd never heard of Jet Li, but they were fanboying over him. And I think we watched all the Feng Sayuk videos just Friday nights after school. So I think that was kind of my first exposure to people who were just really interested in these films about our culture. But it's not something, again, that I ever thought I could do. It was only, many years later that I even thought I could be a novelist. And that was a long journey, a 15-year journey. And then I think going from novel to film was an even bigger jump. But things have just started to come together, and it's been really exciting.
I was reading an article saying that you really started your writing journey after you had children, and curious how you found the time to write a novel with young children. I just finished the first draft of my very first novel, and I have an almost 2-year-old, and that was very challenging to get even here, let alone get it ready to even send out. But how did you find the time? How did you put that together with young kids?
Yeah, so the funny thing about maternity leave, I think I was a little terrified of it. I think a lot of women are. They're afraid that if they go on maternity leave, is their job really secure? Will they be able to come back? Will they even have the skills left to come back? And I had all those feelings too when I was pregnant with my second child. My first child I actually had in law school, so that was a different struggle. But the wonderful thing about maternity leave is it also just gave me all this time to reflect and decide what is it that I really want. And so it was when I was pregnant with my second child, that I started thinking about this fantasy novel I was interested in writing. And I was thinking also about becoming a law professor at the time. And my husband was like, you're so excited about this book. Why don't you just write it and try and see what happens? And it just came pouring out of me. I remember I was writing it on bed rest. And then after my kid was born, I did what I did in law school, which is I did a lot of writing when I was nursing, or there's a lot of downtime when you're raising a kid where you're just kind of waiting for them to wake up. And so I was able to use that time too. But it's also really busy time where you just don't get any sleep and you're a little bit, crazy all the time. So I used that time to watch movies, and I joked that was my research. So I think really what having kids did for me is that it accelerated it raised the bar for me on the kind of satisfaction I needed for my job, because it wasn't worth being away from the kids for a job that I wasn't excited about. And so it forced that for me. And then the second part is it did give me this moment, this opportunity to try something different while I was on leave. And then, I ended up loving it. I did go back to law after that, but I went back to law already kind of entrenched in this writing world and wanting to continue in it. So I did that in a parallel track for many years.
When I was leaving Sundance to start my creative career, my last hurrah at the festival was I had everyone on my team when they were doing interviews. My role there was to create the content for the Institute to put out throughout the year. So I talked to all the filmmakers and writers and composers, and I asked them what that pivotal moment was to get them to quit their day job, and what their day job was and how they got there. Because I think to be an independent artist, a writer, a director in any creative field, especially when you have a family and responsibilities, it's an incredible risk. Could you talk through that moment when you got to quit your day job, basically?
Yeah. So I feel like there were 3 times that I pivoted. The first was not becoming a law professor, so I ended up staying in industry. I went to a law firm. The second was leaving the law firm, and that was really hard because I had always been on the fast track my whole life and in leadership roles. And at a law firm, you do a lot of the board work, the senior level work. You're working on very large multibillion-dollar deals. And I remember at the time I was thinking I had the opportunity to try out another job in-house at a venture capital fund. And it turned out to be a really fun job. It was really easy for me. Like I covered someone's sabbatical and it was like a half-time job for me. And I even talked to my boss about that. I'm like, is this a real job? And she's like, this is a real job. And she knew that I wanted to write. And she's like, you can take this job and write and it'll give you the time that you need. And so I did. It was a really hard choice because I felt like I was stepping off the fast track legal path. But it was the right choice for me because it gave me that time to write. It gave me access to like all the cool startup companies and cool technologies in the Valley and to work with a lot of creative people. And then I also had time to raise my children and actually, be there. So I was there for, I think, 10 years. And in that time, there were a lot of ups and downs. I definitely felt the cost of leaving that corporate law track, but a lot of different things came together. And I've spoken about this in other contexts with not getting promoted and some of the struggles there. But things kind of came together at once. I ended up getting a double promotion into a really cool business AI role. I hosted Intel's AI podcast, and then the book got published and turned into a film. And it wasn't until, I think, 2021, so a whole year and a half after my book came out, and I was already on the path to getting this film made, that I finally had the courage to leave my job. And I haven't looked back since. And so now I'm immersed full-time in content creation. But what I tell people who are writing is that I don't actually write that much more than when I had my day job. I think I do more producing work, but I think we have a finite capacity to produce every day. And I try to max out that time. It's about 3 hours for me. And the rest of the time I do producing work, I take meetings, I hang out with my family, and I just kind of regenerate and learn and take in content.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that journey. In creative careers, the path is really individual to the person. I rarely see a lawyer track or anything like that because there's so much luck and craft, and it really takes time to develop your voice and get the ability to sit down for 3 hours and write. I think that's a challenge for people. So I'm going to step back for a second and ask what films you watched as research when you were on maternity leave for your sci-fi novel.
So I've watched different things for different books, but on that maternity leave, I remember watching all the Harry Potter movies. And I was actually making up for it in the past. I'm not Catholic, but there was one year that I decided to give up fantasy novels and movies because I felt I was just too obsessed. And so I think I went the flip side when I was on maternity leave and I ended up watching all those and binging. So definitely Harry Potter, probably Narnia. I started watching a lot of cartoons then with my older child, who I think was 4 at the time. So we probably watched all the Disney classics. I love musicals, so Disney kind of fills that gap for me. What else? Yeah, probably my favorites that I mentioned earlier. I kind of go back to them as like models of like movies that really captured my imagination as a young person and that I wanted to live in and watch over and over again.
And when you started writing, did you know you wanted to focus on the young adults?
I started with a middle grade fantasy, and then I wrote a young adult contemporary after that. And I actually remember at the time really struggling to get that young adult voice. My voice I felt like it was too old because I was always an old soul, even as a young person. And so now I'm even older. But then, and strangely enough, after I stopped trying, my voice actually just naturally became a young adult voice. Or maybe that's just how my brain works. But I loved the young adult genre myself, I think, because there's a lot of firsts. There's first time away from home, like Wong. There's your first kiss, your first crush, your first date, your first experiences of autonomy and separating from your parents. And so I think that's an experience. It's a rite of passage that so many people can relate to. And that's borne out with my readership. My readers are 13 to 90. And I love that. I love that they can all find something that they relate in the story.
I want to talk a little bit more about the adaptation from book to film, because it's interesting that your process is watching films to write a novel. Did you always have a vision of it becoming a film when you wrote the book?
So I had written 5 novels on the way to Loveboat Taipei, and I think the 3rd novel, I'd gotten an agent with it, and I had multiple agents bidding. At the time, they thought that one could be a movie. So I think that was the first time the bug was really planted for me. I had heard other people respond to my writing saying that it was very cinematic and they could really see visually what was going on. And I think that's also just, I think visually, and my exercise in writing is to write down what's in my head and what I see so that other people can see it too. So with Loveboat Taipei, I definitely pretty early on started hearing people say, hey, that could be a really cool movie. And then when I went out to get an agent, I had a lot of agents kind of saying the same thing. And same with the publishers. We went to auction with a bunch of the big houses, and everybody was excited about the possibility of it being a film. So that wasn't always the case in my very long journey to Loveboat Taipei, but it was definitely something that evolved over time.
I really wish I had the time to read the book before I watched the film. I'm a big fan of reading before watching. I've noticed recently that I've been loving the book to series, to episodic series adaptations. So I'm curious why you went into the traditional film route versus thinking of it as an episodic series.
Well, I was definitely pitched both. That was actually one of the first questions the producers would ask me when I started interviewing them. Do you see this as a film or television series? Somebody asked me, do you see this as a musical or something that's a little, leaning slightly into the dance elements? Because, as you know, there's a big dance theme in the novels. For me, I actually find this division in Hollywood very strange, even though it's a very clear division. There's people who work in TV and there's people who work in film. And for me, it actually feels very much the same. I have no problems taking the same story and making either a TV version or a film version. I just see that it's like you compress storylines and you remove certain plot points. It is structured a little differently, but at the end of the day, if you have a TV series that goes on for a long time, to me that's just a very, very, very long novel or a very, very long film. And over time, I can still see a 3-act structure in most stories. So I think I was really open to what it ended up being, and so where we ended up was a film for the first one, but we really could go in a number of directions afterwards. And then same with all the rest of my novels that are coming through the pipeline and my other projects, like I can take them in a number of directions.
So tell me a little bit about seeing your words adapted visually, like out of your mind into reality. What has that experience been for you?
So I describe that as Loki meeting another Loki. It's from the very beginning when we were looking at takes. So a bunch of screenwriters came through and would present their vision for how they would take the book, the 400-page novel, and shrink it into a 100-page script. And so that was like kind of seeing the book iterated over and over. And then we had a screenwriter and, we talked through drafts. I saw various versions of that get revised and I would give comments. And then with the auditions, I would again see pieces of the script read for different auditions with different emphases and personalities. And then on set, what I was seeing was take after take every day, because every scene gets filmed 8 times from different perspectives with different inflections, and kind of you give yourself optionality later on to string together the different scenes with different emotional weights. And so I did feel like I was just being iterated over and over again. These characters that I know so well, like that, you're right, they were out of my head, like are now here on the page. And I think that was true too for seeing the settings, especially the set design that was done. We had a very talented production designer, Jen Morden, who just built these gorgeous sets in Taipei. And then we actually did reshoots in London where we had to seamlessly integrate the same settings, but we had to build a different set. And it was amazing to see how that set was different yet the same, like enough that you wouldn't be able to tell if you were. Actually, I'd be curious if anyone can tell when you see the film, like where are those moments, which ones were filmed in London versus which ones were filmed in Taiwan.
I'd have to watch it again with that in mind to see if I could pick it out. But nothing glared to me. They did a wonderful job with continuity.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was just a very short, not even a day in London. So
through this experience, what is inspiring you to take on the director's cap?
So I think for me, it's just a natural extension of my existing skill set. So I grew up in my career in the tech industry and I took on leadership roles. And for me, it's an opportunity to take the same, visual thinking that I bring to my books, storytelling, and just help apply that a little bit more deeply.
Yeah. I always think about when writers like move to the directing seat, some quotes from Quentin Tarantino, who had his first film, True Romance. It's an amazing classic film directed by an incredible director. And he was like, but it's not the way I saw the film. And so I want to direct the rest of my work. And so he moved in that direction. And I can totally understand that, both as a writer and a director, of, how hard it is to adapt somebody else's vision, especially when it comes from a novel, because there's so much time and heart spent with those characters from the author and all the iterations that you were talking about that happens. And then as a writer, it's so hard to watch your babies be killed over and over again in different ways and iterated, and having to let go of ideas that end up not working for a film. I think that's why, from a writing perspective, I like episodic, because there's just more room to save all the little pieces than in a film that really has that structure.
For sure. Yeah, I think with TV, you can follow the characters for so much longer. You get to know them much better than in a film.
Yeah. So how old are your children now?
So they are older. They're older, 16 and 20, 21, almost 21.
Amazing. They must be so proud to see what you've been able to accomplish. Are they?
Yeah,
I mean, are they old enough to tell you that yet, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, no, we have I love our family. Like we used to, before my kid went off to college, we would just incubate ideas at the dinner table. And we still do whenever we're together. We love to talk about ideas, like whether it's in AI or in creative. So yeah, we have a good time together. We have a little WhatsApp group that we like to chat on. Although right now one kid is in a camp that doesn't have any Wi-Fi access, so we are down to 3. But it's been really wonderful to grow up with them. And I think what they've seen in my experience is really an example of perseverance more than anything else, because they saw how long the journey was.
Yeah. And how did you introduce them to films and stories?
Yeah, I think it was kind of similar with my brother and sister. I started off telling stories to my kid. I'd read books with him. We'd go to Barnes and Noble, and we'd watch movies together as a family. So it's very much a part of like what we do together.
Was there any kind of specific films you absolutely wanted to make sure they saw?
There were actually, like It's a Wonderful Life. They didn't like it, but I loved it. I think because it was so black and white, they couldn't relate at all to it. Definitely my favorites that I mentioned. We watched all the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Narnia. A lot of fantasy, I guess. Star Wars, of course. We are definitely big Star Wars fans in this family.
Did you have any rituals around reading the books and then seeing the films, or vice versa?
I actually found that it was easier for me to read a book after I saw the movie, which is like, I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit as an author, but I think I did find a lot of books through movies. Like I would watch the film and fall in love with the characters. And then when I picked up the book, I did have all their images in my head at that point. But there are definitely beloved books that I just was so excited to see the movie version of. And that's true for a lot of these old favorites that I mentioned. The most recent, I guess, was A Wrinkle in Time, which I grew up reading over and over again. And it was just so fun to see how different the movie version is today than I think even that I ever imagined it in the past.
Do you think having children, you mentioned that you wanted to do something that meant more to you because time away from them costs more to your emotional soul. Were there specific kinds of stories you wanted to tell for your kids? And you mentioned a little bit about not having representation growing up on screen, and I'm curious how that led into your choices in storytelling.
I definitely felt there was a lack of Asian American representation on screen in general. I think it was even more true for Asian American men. And I think that was something I cared about even before I had children. But definitely having children, you want them to grow up in a safe world. So I do think about how does my work help to open up minds and kind of help to transform culture and make our world safer for everybody. And I think so much of that has to do with just that empathy that movies can create and can instill in us when we walk miles in someone else's shoes, that someone who isn't this, doesn't look like us, and maybe they don't eat the same food we do. But then when you get inside their heads and their lives and their families, you realize actually they're just the same as we are. And so I feel like that is something that I tried to do with the Loveboat series, is like I'm showcasing a community of Asian Americans, and they're all really different, but they're also, at the core, we're all still just human. And the feedback that I got from readers, I feel like that is one of my proudest accomplishments with the series, that people do feel like, hey, people of all different ethnicities related to my characters. And I think that was huge for me.
Yeah, watching Love in Taipei, it reminded me of a summer when I was younger than those characters, but I was 15 and I danced in the south of France. And it was going somewhere where I was fish out of water. I spoke mediocre French. I went by myself, similarly to your character, and had the most amazing summer of my life. Still to this day, it was such a precious time where I had autonomy but innocence, and I felt your the film, and I'm assuming these are some of the feelings in the book that were adapted, just really capture that kind of coming of age, innocence, exploration, finding agency, and just self discovery. And it was really fun to watch. And I definitely saw myself in the characters. So that was really well done.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
So I'm going to move forward with my last question, which is, what film would you recommend my son watch to fall in love with cinema?
There's the amazing thing about today is there are so many good movies that it's hard for me to just pick one. And I think also part of my thesis is that diversity of humanity. I think you should watch lots of different movies, different styles, different main types of main characters, different families, fantasy, as well as contemporary and historical. And I think there's just so much to learn about people. I think in the younger years, it was like a lot of cartoons. Like they're super fun. The characters are larger than life. We watched Cars and Toy Story, and I mentioned the Disney classics. And then as you get older, I think even watching shows that are outside your comfort zone. I had my son watch To All the Boys I Loved Before with me. It's like, let's watch it. And I have a friend whose son is obsessed with Taylor Swift, right? And I think in the way that I kind of grew up watching a lot of male dominated movies, like I think let's have everybody watch movies that are both male and female dominated, and people that are different than yourselves. Again, it's kind of back to that thesis of just walking in the shoes of someone else.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and talking about your journey to get to your film coming to TV screens. And it must be really exciting as you come up to the premiere.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and we're just kicking it off. So it was really fun to talk with you. You're one of the first people that I've had a conversation with about the film. So thank you for taking the time.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.